The Torrance's journey to the Overlook is really motivated by, this idea of upward mobility. It's motivated by economics. I think they're motivated by, especially for Jack, the idea of maybe reinventing himself, and they share that with a lot of people, like especially a lot of the laborers in the past. But I think there's kind of this idea where maybe at the beginning they almost might want to think of themselves as the equals of kind of the jet setters, the all the best people that Stuart Ullman references, the former kind of occupants of the hotel that were really elite. When in fact, I think they have a lot more in common with, say, the people who built the Timberline Lodge, those unemployed laborers. Because as far as I know, Wendy doesn't have a job. Jack has been fired from his teaching job. It's
Yeah.
not spelled out too much in the movie, but it's in the book. And
Yeah,
so,
and
like,
it's
they're
also,
pretty
they
desperate.
they they don't mention this, but, that shirt that he's wearing, in that scene you alluded to when, she's giving him breakfast and it pulls away from the mirror, apparently that shirt that he's wearing is from the school he used to teach at.
Ah,
So they
right.
kind of hint at it, but it's not really a big part of the story.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think a key thing that separates the Torrances from, say, the Donner Party, or all these people who were led on these journeys for economic reasons to kind of, advance their social position in life, is the fact that, the Torrances have everything they need and more. They're protected, supremely protected from the natural elements. We see that fireplace; it looks incredibly warm in
Oh,
the
yeah,
Colorado
yeah,
Lounge.
and they've got all the food they'll ever need for the entire stay that they're there.
Well, Dick Halloran makes a note of saying, like, 50 rib roasts, and
Yeah.
and like going through the list of all the food. He said you could eat here for a year and not have the same menu twice.
Yeah, multiple turkeys and stuff like that.
And they also have more space than they could ever use. Like, they have an abundance of material goods. And I think this is an interesting point because what they don't have and what ultimately drives them insane is they don't have other people. They don't have community. And it's precisely because of the, appurtenances of capital, capitalist abundance, and technology and whatnot, that, Ullman and the hotel management is able to hire this minimal team of 3 people to maintain the hotel in the winter. It's because they have, radio technology. They have the boiler system. They have this walk-in fridge where they can preserve the food. They have all this technology that allows them to survive, which sets up the conditions by which they ultimately succumb in a different way, which is it sets up these conditions of extreme isolation, alienation, depression, insomnia, and ultimately insanity.
Yeah, and it's kind of something worth to mention that besides the car trip at the very beginning, I can't really think of a time when you see the three of them all together at the same time. Like you might see combinations of them, like you'll see Danny and Jack together, and you'll see Jack and Wendy together, and Wendy and Danny, but you won't really see the three of them together as a family, you know, spending any time together, whether even if they're just, having dinner or something.
Well, they fairly quickly become sort of alienated from each other
Yeah,
too.
right, right. So I mean, with a lack of people, they're not even together as the group that they came in.
Right, right. And it's I think a pretty powerful irony that the very things that would have saved, say, the Donner Party in the past, material well-being, like a warm house to stay in,
Mm,
is exactly what causes the Torrance's downfall.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
think, by invoking all of this history, I think The Shining is a movie which is trying to kind of, on some level, dramatize the myth of social mobility in America. They're like, okay, listen, the Donner Party tried and failed. These laborers tried and failed. All these other people in the past met pretty, gruesome ends. And here's another example of a family who thinks they're going to, rise their station in life and make it, and they don't. Once again, the cycle repeats. To go back to Freud and the uncanny, it repeats, and they fail as well. They succumb.
Right, even though they've got all the things that that perhaps those people going out west could have used most.
Right, right. And I think, especially when you look at Jack Torrance, while he's probably led to the overlook by the prospect of like a better life, of writing that novel and furthering his career. I think what really, kind of makes him stay at the overlook and really kind of develop a deep attachment to it is this longing for a sense of belonging, a desire for community. And it's kind of in contrast to that Danny and Dick Halloran kind of developed this telepathic fellowship as well. I think this desire for community, when there are such deep forces of alienation going on. I mean, Wendy doesn't seem to have any friends. Jack certainly doesn't really seem to have any friends. Danny doesn't.
Yeah, they seem to be perfectly fine with going to stay at this place in isolation for several months.
Well, they
And
don't
that
really have any social connections they have to like deal with, right? They just
yeah,
go.
yeah, I guess, yeah, but it does seem as something that's kind of it's kind of odd. I mean, maybe there were, economic factors going in, but yeah, it's odd. Like, I mean, they're going to be spending months. I mean, some of the coldest months of the year just away from their friends. And typically, I mean, if it is the winter, that's also Christmas and things like that, which is typically, you're going to be having parties and gatherings and things like that. But here they are, they're just going to go sequester themselves in isolation.
Right, and they do kind of celebrate New Year's with ghosts,
Right.
basically. I mean, that's the time, and the only time in the movie when you see them with, any amount of people.
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting. Frederick Jameson has written more about this, kind of arguing that there's a reason why Kubrick focused on the 1920s in particular. With that party scene, with the photo at the end, 1921, where you see Jack in that photo. And because in the novel, it actually takes place in the 40s and kind of the post-war era after World War II.
Mm.
And Kubrick changed it to the 1920s. And Jameson argues the reason why Kubrick chose the 20s is because, quote, the 20s were the last moment in which a genuine American leisure class led an aggressive and ostentatious public existence, in which an American ruling class projected a class conscious and unapologetic image of itself and enjoyed its privileges without guilt.
Right. Much like the Great Gatsby.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And I think the reading into that more, and what Jameson argues is the really disturbing thing about The Shining, is that it exposes that, a lot of the class fantasies of contemporary American society, at least in the 70s and 80s, was about this ideal, what he says, quote, is the ideological project to return to the hard certainties of a more visible and rigid class structure. And the reason why Jack Torrance is so willing to prostrate himself to this hotel and its masters is because at least it offers him a place. He
Hmm.
might become like Delbert Grady, nothing but a butler, but at least by being this butler, by kind of taking this journey back into the 20s and its class structure, he has a place. And it's disturbing to think that for him, that's more important than anything: friends, family, even ultimately his novel. To hear the full podcast episode, head on over to patreon.com/nowitsdark. For as little as a cup of coffee a month, you can access exclusive episodes like our two-part, 237-minute series on The Shining, bonus episodes, ad-free videos, and more. Because, if you think about Jack's predicament in that particular point in time, in that consumerist society of the 70s and into the 80s, he is fully responsible for his predicament as the head of the household, you know, in this highly individualized society at the time. All of the, responsibility for his success or his failure rests on his shoulders, and to some degree, Wendy's. But he, as a kind of, full-blooded male of his time is going to accept the full responsibility of that, and it's unbearable for him. At least in the 20s and the class structure, if he does accept this lower rank, if he is no more than kind of hired help, at least his failure is explained by the overdetermination of the class structure. He had no chance of rising above his station, so he doesn't have to bear responsibility for failing to do so. And so I think the novel, in a way, becomes a pretense for that journey back into this kind of class structure of the 1920s, and for really kind of being able to free himself from the miserable, alienating, depressing responsibility of having to fail and bear the full responsibility for that failure.
Yeah, because I mean, he doesn't actually, as we know from the crazy stuff that he writes, he doesn't actually get anything done. But you kind of think that that was a big reason why they took this job in the first place, was that, well, I've been fired from my teaching job. At least this way, I can kind of try and make things right again and go right and just take the time to really get everything I need done to start all over again. But yeah, he right away just kind of foregoes all of that.
Right. And I mean, for Kubrick, it kind of makes sense because he was born in 1928. I think he would have a certain amount of familiarity and maybe even nostalgia for the 1920s, much the way, like, we would have for the 80s or 90s, where
Mm,
it's kind of like that was our childhood.
yeah.
But in terms of like the movie itself and Jack Torrance, and even its relevance for today, I think it really exposes that with, the forces of economic deprivation, isolation, people will, and the depression and all the mental and physical ailments that go along with that, people will ultimately revert back and desire a more rigid hierarchy if it affords them a place.